Hey, friends, welcome to the Church Brain Podcast. Now, each week, we talk about how churches behave during seasons of stress and transition, and how leaders can respond and should respond with clarity and steadiness. Now, the goal is simple. When anxiety and stress rise, leaders help the church think clearly again. Let's jump in. Now, in this week's briefing, we talked about why conflict often resurfaces during leadership transitions or church transitions. It's really not unusual. In fact, it's fairly predictable. When leadership changes, whether that's a pastor or committee chair leadership, Sunday school, small group leadership, other staff member leadership, you've got uncertainty that will increase. Tensions that were once quiet can now suddenly, in your mind, suddenly reappear. So today I want to talk about our response as leaders in these particular kinds of moments. Now, the question is not simply why conflict appears. The question for today is this: how do leaders guide a congregation through the conflict without letting it change or derail the mission of the church, without damaging trust in the church? You see, conflict during transition usually is a reflection of anxiety and uncertainty. The leader's role then is to just stabilize the moment so the church, well, they can think clearly again. Let me give you 3 leadership practices that I think are going to help you as you no doubtedly face some difficult times or some conflict in your situation. Here's the first one: slow the moment. Now, you've heard me say that before, and I can't say it enough. I can't say it strong enough or often enough. Slow down. And so I'm returning to this idea again. Why? Anxiety speeds everything up. And when people feel uneasy about the future, well, they want quick answers and immediate decisions. Speed, speed, speed. Your job is to slow it down, because wise leadership will slow the room down. I remember working with a church that a committee meeting suddenly became super tense over a proposed ministry change. Now, the conversation began to escalate quickly, and it was getting a little bit out of control. Voices grew sharper, and people began repeating their positions more firmly and more often, to where you had 3 different side arguments going on, and you had no conversation, no dialogue happening really as the committee as a whole. So this is what the chairman did. Instead of pushing the group toward a vote, this is what he did. He simply paused the discussion. Hey, he got everybody's attention. That took a second, but he got everybody's attention. He paused all the discussion, and he simply said this: before we make a decision, let's make sure that we understand the concerns that are being raised. Now, that simple pause changed the whole atmosphere, because he took the time, and they got a whiteboard out, and he went committee member by committee member. What do you see good? What do you see bad? And they literally wrote a pros and cons chart out on the whiteboard, and then just simply was asking the question: what do we need to do about this? And because he allowed people to start being heard, and because he slowed it down, he didn't raise his voice, he softened his tone, slowed down his speech, and just let them share a little bit. And then he called them to prayer. And really, he said, this isn't a critical ministry change that has to happen tonight. Why don't we spend this time in prayer, and at our next meeting, we'll continue this discussion. Now, see, just slowing it down. They had the opportunity to explain what they were worried about, not just in a defensive mode. And it revealed the real issues that were underneath what seemed to be just arguments. So when you've got conflict, the anxiety rises, tension is rising, you got to slow it down. And I know I've said that before, and I will say it again probably 15 more times in other podcasts. Just slow down, because too often we just try to rush through. We try to push through. Let's just get on to the next situation. The second practice that you can do, you've got to clarify the mission. Clarify the mission. You see, conflict tends to grow when conversations drift away from the agreed upon shared purpose of the group or of the church. Now, even in small groups, you've got to know what the mission is. The finance committee's mission is not about the toilet that's running in the adult hall. The finance committee's mission is not about the value of children's ministry or the work of the youth ministry or where we're going on a mission trip. You've got to clarify that mission. As a church, conflicts can rise because we get into preferential idolatry. In other words, this group wants to do this thing. This group wants to do this thing. You, as the leader, have to bring them back to, let's get back to the main mission of the church, which, of course, is the Great Commission. But then hopefully your body has developed language around how that looks and feels and behaves in your context. You see, when members begin debating preferences or debating personal priorities, the discussion can become competitive. But when the leaders return the conversation to the church's mission, the tone often will change, because how do you argue with the Great Commission? Now, we might have arguments about how that looks and feels and behaves, but those are at least more productive conversations than arguing about personal preferences about the mission. A church may disagree about how resources should be used during a transition. One group wants to invest in a brand new outreach effort. Another group believes the church should strengthen existing ministries first. What are you going to do? You see, if the conversation stays at the level of just personal preferences, frustration can certainly increase. But when leaders ask questions like, what option best helps us reach and disciple people in our community? Just let it sit. Let it sit there. You see, the conversation then shifts. What option best helps us fulfill the Great Commission? Now, people begin evaluating ideas through the lens of shared calling rather than personal attachment. Now, I'm not going to say it's as clear cut as that, because sometimes personal attachments are so deep and so entrenched that you have to unearth some of those things. Clarifying the mission doesn't eliminate the disagreement, but it can bring perspective back into the room. All right, the third thing that you can do, you've got to protect the relational climate. During conflict, the emotional tone of the room matters as much as the decision being discussed. If conversations become defensive, personal, trust can erode very quickly. Leaders must guard against relational climate. You've got to hold on to it. You have to hold on to those relationships, because it's the relationships that matter. We're supposed to do what? Love God and love our neighbor. And loving our neighbor begins with loving that person sitting next to me in church. That's a relationship. We have to hold on to that. And so we have to model this behavior that we hope to see out of them. So what do? Well, you listen patiently. Listen to what they have to say. Now, I know we've got to be careful to not be affirming and therefore think they've got you triangulated into their position. You do need to listen with patience. Restate the concerns. That way people feel heard. I'm hearing you say this. That's just mirroring. And that's a very powerful thing to do in these moments because it tells the person, I'm hearing you, right? And you let them either affirm or correct what you did or didn't hear. You have to refuse to let sarcasm or dismissive comments set the tone. You've got to refuse to use inflammatory language. Honestly, there are people, I've seen it. Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You can't say that and protect the relational climate. Are you just out of your mind? You can't say that and protect relational climate. You've got to help protect these relationships. I've seen situations where two members strongly disagreed about a ministry decision. The conversation could have easily turned into a personal dispute. And you know what? I've seen it turn into a personal dispute. Personnel committee was not agreeing on things. And one member of the committee literally looked over to the other member of the committee and said, I will beat you up. And he said coarser language than that. And the other guy said, well, bring it on. And they almost literally, if somebody hadn't stepped in front, they would have gotten to a fist fight. The chairman did not do their job in that moment because they allowed it to turn into a personal dispute. So what should the leader have done in that moment? Well, the leader needs to calmly summarize both viewpoints. Thank each person for their commitment to the church. You know what, John? I sense your passion, and I appreciate how much you want to be committed to the church and support the church. You know, Bob, I see the passion that you have, and I see that you are committed deeply to this church. You know what? You both are committed to this church. But we are going to have to walk through how to get beyond this disagreement. Is there a different option? Is there a way that we can see a third alternative? Or is there a way that we can meet in the middle in this particular instant? Now, again, in that moment, the disagreement may not disappear, but what you've done is the temperature in the room has dropped immediately. People begin to realize that the goal was understanding, not winning. Now, that's big. If you're going to protect the relational climate, you've got to move to collaboration instead of competition. The goal is understanding, not winning. James really gives a simple but powerful instruction for moments like this, doesn't he? Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. That posture alone can transform the tone of a difficult conversation. As you think about your own leadership context this week, consider where you might need to slow down a conversation so the church can move from reaction to clarity and understanding. Conflict during transition doesn't always mean something's wrong. Sometimes it just means the church is wrestling with important questions about its future. And when leaders guide these moments patiently and thoughtfully, the church often can emerge with stronger trust, clearer direction, and clarity about the mission and the value of relationships. Well, thank you for spending a few moments with me today. If this episode was helpful, share it with somebody else that might need this type of navigation of a challenging season. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the Church Brain and receive the weekly briefings, these podcasts, and other notes and chats along the way. Remember, God is already at work in your church, even in seasons of uncertainty. See you later.